Well, I'm joined now by Jeffery Hamelman, the director of the King Arthur Flour Bakery in Norwich, Vermont. He's the author of Bread, a baker's book of techniques and recipes, Bread Book. Jeffery is a certified master baker, a distinction held only by a handful of bakers in the United States. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, what is it that you look for in bread?
When I'm eating good bread, I'm looking for flavor and nutrition and pleasure. I think, to me, bread creates a space for sharing, and really good bread is enjoyed more if it's shared, and I think pleasure is a really important component of bread.
And when you're making bread, what do you look for?
Oh, what do I look for when I'm making bread? Well, we're looking for good ingredients that are going to be the best ones possible for that particular type of bread.
And can a baker take average ingredients and turn it into good bread, or do you have to start with the best ingredients?
It's more challenging if you don't have first-class ingredients. I can say that definitely from experience. Using Vermont-grown wheat, we have found in the King Arthur Bakery, where we do a lot of experimentation with a lot of flours from all over the continent, the Vermont grains are more challenging. That being said, there are techniques and strategies that a skilled baker can use to maximize the potential of the grain. There are a lot of small little steps right across the way from when you first begin making a sourdough right through until you put the bread in the oven, and everywhere in between, that we can make slight adjustments in order to try to give the bread as much strength as possible and as much potential for good results.
Are you excited that wheat is being grown again in Vermont? It's on a small scale, I understand, but just the local aspect of it.
I'm very excited. I've always felt, for many years anyway, that restaurant chefs can stand up proudly and say, you know, everything we make is fresh, local, and seasonal. Mostly bakers aren't able to say that their grain is local. We're pretty much all of us asking Kansas to do that legwork, so by the time we have flour in the bakery, it's already been trucked, you know, halfway across the continent. That's one reason why at the King Arthur Bakery we've intentionally stayed very, very local, because the idea of then taking the bread, which is made from that faraway grain, and sending trucks up and down the highway for hundreds of miles, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
And you say, too, it makes a big difference in the flavor of the bread to have local, fresher ingredients.
Yes. The challenge of using Vermont grains is that our soils and our growing conditions are not nearly as favorable as they would be in a place like Kansas or a lot of places in the Midwest. So that's definitely a drawback. On the other hand, the thing that balances that is that the whole wheat that we use in Vermont, that's grown in Vermont, tends to be much fresher. It's milled much closer to the time of the bake, and the flavor is very perceptibly superior. It's much sweeter, it's much nuttier flavored, and I think nutritionally it's probably superior as well because it's fresher.
And so what do you see as some of the challenges for Vermont grain growers moving ahead from here?
As Heather said, the infrastructure is basically non-existent, so the milling that's done with Vermont whole wheat is done by the farmer himself for the most part. That's a big challenge. Our soils aren't nearly as rich as the ones that are identified as being the great wheat growing parts of the country, so that's going to be a challenge as well. I think a third challenge is, and this is being addressed more and more all the time, is having the best communication possible between the baker and the farmer so that each one knows the needs and the logistics and the challenges the other one faces.
And the third component of that, of course, would be the consumer who would demand these products.
Yes. And that we see being more, everywhere we look in the state, we're seeing more and more the whole local movement and people wanting this. So, you know, if the farmer is able to learn as many skills as possible for raising the best quality wheat in our climate, and the baker is able to maximize his or her skill in being able to make the best bread with somewhat deficient ingredients, at least in terms of gluten quality, protein quantity, things like that, it's pretty sure that the consumer is definitely going to stand behind it and demand this kind of thing.
What have you seen at King Arthur? Have you seen an increase in the number of people who want to bake their own breads? do their own baking?
Yes, in fact, it was a very interesting phenomenon. Last year, when it seemed like the whole economy was in free fall, flour sales for King Arthur were better than ever. And it seems that more and more people were saying, okay, times are tough, let's get back to baking our own bread at home, which can only be a good thing.
Now, you brought some examples of some of your breads. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
I made these up last week. They're just pretty much basic decorative shapes. This is called the Lyonnaise Sun. This is an épi de blé, which means sheath of wheat.
I'm going to hold the sun up because it looks just beautiful. I'll try not to break it. But it's spectacular. It's great. And you've done this through you were telling me earlier that some strategic cutting of the dough creates the pattern.
Yeah, that one pretty much what you see is what you get. This one's a bit more challenging. This is called the Crown of Bordeaux. I don't know where I should point that, right about there. Looks good. And it's another traditional decorative shape. And
it's really wonderful because it has these little scallops, and you were explaining to me how you do that, and it's a really kind of a neat process.
Yeah, unless it's explained, it's almost impossible to deduce the way it's made. So that makes it fun. And then this was just, well, truth be told, just some leftover ciabatta dough that I just put together into a round loaf. So there we have it.
And so when you bake, I mean, everything sort of comes into play as far as the ingredients that you use, but also even, you know, each day varies.
Each day varies, for sure. I mean, the King Arthur Bakery, we're not climate controlled. We've got one heck of a big oven, which means that in the summertime, it's a really hot environment to be baking in, which isn't necessarily just difficult for humans. It's very difficult for the bread as well, because everything is metabolizing a lot more quickly. And in the winter, the oven is our heater. So I think people really like just sort of cozying up to the oven on those chilly winter days.
I would think on a winter day it'd be the perfect place to be.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place to be.
Tell me a little bit about some of the feedback maybe that you've gotten from some of your customers as far as their local baking, interest in baking again, and what people really need to learn first off if they're interested in getting back to baking.
Well, one of the very successful components of King Arthur is not just the flour sales. Then we have the bakery, which, as I said, we stay rather local, but then we also have our school. And the Baking Education Center, we've got classes going on almost 30 days a month. There's something going on. It might be classes for people who've never picked up a teaspoon measure before and they don't know which end to hold, all the way up to people who've been baking professionally for literally 30 years or more, and everything in between. So there'll be classes geared toward children during holidays. There'll be kids camps. There'll be classes where a parent comes with a child, bakes up a big bunch of stuff from scratch, and then takes it home to eat it. There's all manner of classes, and this is a great way we've found in the just about 10 years that we've been running classes that we seem to be able to touch most everybody who's at whatever stage of their baking interest and growth, and that's very rewarding.
Jeffrey, thanks so much for bringing all these beautiful breads in for us today. If you're interested more about the King Arthur Flour Bakery and School in Norwich, Vermont, you can find more information on their website. We also have information about Eric Andrus and the Good Companion Bakery, which is in Ferrisburg. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Can't wait to sample. You know, that is my job. That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension, the Vermont Agricultural Experiment Station, and WCAX-TV.